As a recent high school graduate, getting a full-time job at KFC felt like a big deal. We were the go-to chicken joint in town, especially since other places like Popeyes weren't as popular back then. Our hours were usually from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., sometimes even midnight on weekends. The job itself felt like second nature to me. Clock in, clean up, fry the chicken, and assist customers at the cashier, rinse and repeat. But there was one particular incident that made my time at KFC unforgettable. It all started when I encountered a homeless man who had dressed up as the Colonel himself. At first, I was skeptical of his appearance. He looked too fancy to be homeless, but according to rumors from other employees, he had been panhandling in the area for weeks. As I approached the front door of KFC on my way to work, the Colonel raised his plastic cup at me and asked for spare change. "Sir, I only make minimum wage," I replied. But he persisted, asking for leftover chicken during my lunch break. The first few weeks on the job were smooth sailing, but things took a turn for the worse when our chicken supply started running low. My boss immediately pointed the finger at me, accusing me of taking chicken home after my shifts. I pleaded my innocence, but he didn't believe me. This accusation happened multiple times, and each time, my boss threatened to fire me if any more chicken went missing. I suggested investigating the day shift employees, but my boss insisted it couldn't be them since he supervised them closely. But the real drama unfolded on what could have been my last shift at KFC. It was late on a Friday night, and I was just about to wrap up when I heard a loud thud coming from the kitchen area. I cautiously made my way to the back and heard the sound of chewing coming from the stockroom. I knew someone had to be in there eating our chicken, so I mustered up the courage to confront them. I swung open the door to find the Colonel himself, his face covered in fried chicken. I couldn't believe my eyes. The man who had been asking for spare change outside was the same person eating our chicken behind closed doors. He admitted to sneaking in through a panel on the roof every night and helping himself to our food. I was terrified, but I managed to call the police and explain the situation. When they arrived, we discovered the panel on the ceiling that the Colonel had been using to access the building. Surveillance footage confirmed his nightly visits. It was a bizarre and unsettling experience, to say the least. The man who had seemed harmless enough turned out to be mentally disturbed, in need of professional help. And as for me, well, let's just say I'll never look at a bucket of fried chicken the same way again. I've been working at KFC for about a year now, and what happened recently was the scariest experience I've ever had. Not just at work, but in my entire life. It was a Thursday night, around 9 p.m., and I was on the late shift. We were getting a bit of a rush in the drive-thru, so I was helping my manager with packing orders. The lobby had been empty for about an hour, with no one coming inside. I'd just finished making a famous bowl and handed it to my manager for the drive-thru cashier when I heard the familiar sound of the restaurant door opening. I walked over to the front counter to greet the customer, but no one was there. Puzzled, I turned back to continue my work, when suddenly I heard a voice behind me. There was a girl standing there, even though I hadn't seen her come in. She seemed to have appeared out of nowhere in the few seconds I had turned my back. She was very pretty, my type and everything. She ordered a 2-piece with mac and cheese and a drink, and then she told me I looked cute, and even complimented my red uniform shirt. I blushed and laughed, though I couldn't tell her I thought she was beautiful, since I had to stay professional. I packed her order and brought it to the front counter, calling out to her to let her know it was ready. I waited for a minute but got no response. I called out again, but still nothing. Thinking she might have gone to sit at a booth in the back, I went to check, but she was nowhere to be seen. I was confused but thought she might have gone to the bathroom. As the hour passed and it was time to lock the lobby door, I realized the girl was still missing. The food I had packed for her was still sitting on the counter. I started to worry that something bad had happened to her. I knocked on the door to the women's bathroom and called out, but there was no response. I opened the door and it was clear no one had been in there. I checked the men's restroom as well, but it was empty too. I was in complete shock. How could she have disappeared? The pack line was close to the front counter, and I hadn't heard the door open or close since she came in. No other customers had entered either. I was creeped out but had 2 hours left on my shift. I didn't tell my manager or anyone else, afraid they would think I was lying. I finished cleaning the lobby and completed my other tasks before leaving. I usually walk to and from KFC since I live about 20 minutes away. I said goodbye to my coworkers and started my walk home. About 10 minutes into my walk, I felt an overwhelming sense that I was being watched. I turned back and saw the same girl standing about 500 feet down the road. My jaw dropped. I backed up and looked away for a second. When I looked back, she was gone like she had vanished into thin air. Terrified, I ran the rest of the way home. Once I got to my door, I unlocked it as quickly as I could and rushed inside. This was by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, at KFC or anywhere else. I told one of my managers what happened, and when I described the girl, she was in complete shock. She said it sounded like I was describing Kaylee, an employee who had passed away a few months before I started working there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and it made me pretty emotional. This happened back in 2006. My family lived in a very rural area where there weren't many fast food places. We moved to a more suburban area about 10 miles from the city. After years of not going, we visited KFC again. Even now, when I walk into that restaurant, memories of one of the scariest moments of my childhood flood back. I'm grown up now, but this happened about 17 years ago when I was around 7 or 8 years old. KFC was a special treat for my family. We didn't have it often, so I always looked forward to those nights. Usually my dad would go pick up the food while we stayed home. But one Saturday night, for some reason, I decided to go with him. It was either fall or spring because I remember it being chilly and already getting dark around 6:30 p.m. We went inside, and my dad got in line to order. There was only one person ahead of us. As I waited, I started to wander around the restaurant, looking at everything. The place was empty. Nobody was sitting down to eat. I was in my own little world, exploring the corners of the restaurant. My dad moved up to order, and I found myself near a back corner where there was another door. I was looking out the window when I heard the main door in front of the KFC open. A man walked in and went up to my dad as if to talk to him. At the same time, the back door near me opened, and a woman walked in. She looked around, saw me, and smiled. She extended her hand to me and said hi. I was confused but polite, so I shook her hand and said hi back. But she didn't let go. She grabbed my wrist and started walking backward towards the door, only about 5 feet away. I was surprised and didn't say anything. I just followed her outside, too confused to react. The woman said something like she wanted to show me something really quick. She led me around the corner of the building to a van that looked old and beat up. The door was already open. She put her arm around me and lifted me into the van without asking. At the same time, I saw a man jogging from the other side of the building. He was the same man who had been talking to my dad. He helped the woman get me inside the van, and they slammed the door shut. The man then sprinted to the driver's door. As he did, I saw another figure running around the corner of the building. It was my dad, sprinting towards us. The woman in the back seat with me started screaming, yelling at the man to go. My dad reached the van and stood in front of it, yelling. The woman opened my door and shoved me outside. My dad grabbed me, and they sped away. He pointed out that the van didn't have any license plates as it drove off. We went back inside, and my dad called the police. He was furious and began yelling at the people working at KFC, even though it wasn't their fault. I didn't know what to do. I never expected anything like that to happen. The police arrived, and I talked to a few officers, telling them everything that happened and describing the man, the woman, and their vehicle. Eventually we went home, but we didn't go back to that KFC for a long time after that. Going back to KFC the other day brought back all those memories. I never thought something so scary could happen in a place that seemed so ordinary. I've had my fair share of meals at KFC, but none of them were quite as memorable as the last one I had a few weeks ago. You see, growing up, my parents used to take me and my siblings there as a treat. It wasn't just about the food, it was about the experience. A family outing, they called it. But as I got older, my enthusiasm for KFC waned, and by the time I was about to move out of my parents' house, I couldn't care less about their fried chicken. So there I was, sitting in the dining room of KFC with my parents, chewing on regrettable pieces of fried chicken in complete silence. My dad had just excused himself to the restroom, and I was trying to break the ice by asking my mom what they would do after I left home. And then, he walked in, a man who looked exactly like Colonel Sanders, the iconic face of KFC. But it couldn't be him. The real Colonel had long been dead. Still, everyone in the building, customers and employees alike, turned their heads to get a look at him. He said, "I'm Colonel Sanders." At first, I thought it was some kind of corporate PR stunt, complete with an actor playing the mascot and a room full of unwitting customers. But as he continued to speak, he had everyone convinced, at least for the moment. But as the Colonel made his way through the dining room, something about him began to unsettle me. He would approach each table, ask the customers about their food, and then lean in, staring unflinchingly into their eyes. "Tell me, is it finger-licking good?" he would ask, his voice low and menacing. Most people responded with a quick, "Yeah, sure," or "I think we're done here." But the Colonel would linger, staring into their eyes as he slowly licked his own fingers. It was creepy, to say the least, and I found myself hoping he wouldn't come to our table. But of course, he did. "Well, how nice to see a young man repay his mother with a nice dinner," he said, addressing both me and my mom. But his gaze was fixed on me, and I could feel a chill run down my spine. "You're a fine young man, ain't you, boy?" he said, his eyes boring into mine. I tried to maintain my composure, but I was trembling with fear. Thank you, sir," I managed to stammer out. No, thank you for dining here, son," he said, his voice low and menacing. "How's your fried chicken? Tell me, is it up to your standards?" I glanced around, hoping for a sign from my mom or for my dad to return from the restroom, but everything seemed frozen, and I was left alone with the Colonel, who was now on his knees beside me, reaching for my hands. "Is it finger-licking good?" he said, his mouth hanging open. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, my dad burst back into the room. "Hey, weirdo!" he shouted, grabbing the Colonel and pulling him away from me. The Colonel stumbled to the floor, and my dad loomed over him, his face red with anger. "You trying to propose to my son, punk? Get out of here before I make you wish I was a cop." The Colonel didn't put up a fight. He simply laughed, got to his feet, and ran out the door. We left the table in a hurry, and I think that'll be the last time I ever set foot in a KFC. Later that weekend, my dad caught a news report about the man who had impersonated the Colonel. Apparently, he had been arrested for harassing customers and biting their fingers off. It was a chilling reminder of just how close I had come to becoming one of his victims. And to this day, the thought of fried chicken makes my stomach turn. Last year, I went to the KFC drive-thru one night after shopping. It was around 9 p.m., and I had a craving for a chicken sandwich. When I saw a KFC near the stores I had been at, I decided to stop by. I pulled into the drive-thru, thinking it would be faster. But when I reached the menu and rolled down my window, I didn't hear anything. I waited for about a minute, looking around. The lights were still on, so it seemed like they were open. However, no one was speaking through the intercom. I asked if anyone was there, but got no response. As I sat there, I noticed headlights approaching behind me. A large truck pulled into the drive-thru behind me. I decided to check online to see if the KFC was still open. I took out my phone and started searching for the KFC's hours. After a minute, the truck behind me honked. I looked back, but the bright headlights made it impossible to see the driver. I figured he wanted me to hurry up. While I was on my phone, I heard a door open and shut behind me. The next thing I knew, a man was approaching my driver's window. I rolled it down, and he was angry right away. He had long hair and a beard and was yelling at me to hurry up, saying I was wasting his time. I told him that the KFC was closed and no one had answered the intercom. He didn't seem to understand and kept ranting about how I was wasting everyone's time. He was yelling in a threatening way and seemed likely to be drunk, high, or on some kind of drugs. He wasn't making much sense. I decided to just apologize and told him I was leaving. I didn't know what he was capable of. He cursed at me and started walking back to his truck. I was relieved he was gone and began to drive away. I figured he could find out for himself that the place was closed and no one would answer. As I drove off, he started following me. He honked and revved his engine, driving extremely close to my car. I was worried because if he was on drugs, he definitely shouldn't be driving. His truck was much larger than my little car. I drove out onto the main road and he followed. I hoped he would pass me. After we got past the businesses to a more rural area, he did start to pass me. But when his truck was about even with my car, he rolled down his window and started yelling at me again. Then he veered his truck towards my car, trying to run me off the road. I slammed on my brakes and stopped. His truck kept going and crashed into the ditch. I stopped on the side of the road and saw the man exit his vehicle and start running towards mine. I sped away and called the police to report the incident. Looking back, I'm glad the man went into the ditch because he could have caused a serious accident or hurt someone. I still don't know what his problem was or why he was acting that way, but I'm just grateful that I made it out of that situation safely.